All right, welcome to another episode of KUDEN Radio. Everybody should know who I am, but if you're new to this, Dashi Miller here with Warrior Concepts here in East Central Pennsylvania, and I've got Sensei Alexander in the wings. Uh, anyway, quick question: You ever notice you ever notice what happens when something goes wrong? Right. And I don't mean like a small inconvenience. I mean something that actually like hits you hard, fast, unexpected, right? Um, could come from any number of places, but again, it's one of those things that sometimes it's actually a shock to your system, right? Problem shows up that you didn't plan for, and suddenly thinking changes, everything, right? I mean, you feel it, right? Your focus narrows, your stress spikes, and you feel this need to do something, anything, right? So you end up, you move faster, you try harder, you start taking action, right? Any action, right? But here's the problem: most of that action makes things worse, right? It prolongs things, whatever. One of my teachers used to have a thing for this, right? It was like pouring gasoline on a fire instead of doing what was necessary, right? Um, but this thing happens typically for most people because they skip something, right? And it's something I teach my students in survival training that almost no one applies anywhere else, right? Before you act, you have to establish control, right? And most people don't, right? They react, they rush, they burn energy. It's kind of like a hamster on a wheel, right? Working hard, running his little feet off, going nowhere, and going nowhere fast, right? But the trained individual does something different, right? They stop just long enough to gain some kind of control or clarity over the situation. And that moment changes everything, right? So during this episode, let's talk about what that actually means. And we'll do that after we get started.
So, the big question is this: how are self-defense and success-minded people like us, concerned citizens worried about protecting ourselves, our loved ones, and the things we care about from the monsters we know exist in the world? How do we train in a way that gives us the skills, knowledge, and understanding we need without becoming paranoid fighters or killers ourselves, and yet still allows us to be the hero protector the world needs us to be? That's the question, and this podcast will give you the answers. My name is Jeffrey Miller, and welcome to KUDEN Radio. Real training for real people in a real world.
And after 300, well, today's 301 episodes, still my story, still sticking to it. Anyway, quick question for everyone: if you're one of the regulars, right? If you're in my KUDEN circle, what do you think of the new look? What do you think of the new logo, the new layout, those kind of things? We're still making some changes. I'm still making some changes. Today I recorded the voiceover things for a new intro and a new outro. Today it's going to be like silent movie time. But again, every time we have one of these benchmark things, it's kind of signals a new phase. Right, new phase into training, just like my teacher, Hatsumi Sensei, was doing things too. For a lot of folks, over the years, it just seemed like every year there was a random theme chosen, and the topics and whatnot. But for those who are around long enough, who could actually see the forest for the trees for the forest, right? This dualistic view, right? We could see that the first period, typically in 5-year segments, right? But the first set, we were focusing on technique. We were focusing on where to put things, right? Second set focusing more on the dynamics, right? Flow, timing, those kind of things. And then the third set, we were focusing on uh, more of a strategic insight, right? What are you doing? How are you controlling the bubble? That kind of thing. Now, were there years after that? Yeah. But it was this almost like a Shoden, Chuden, Okuden kind of thing. And then Okuden just kept spilling over because, in all honesty, I don't know that Hansumi Sensei planned to live this long, right? And I don't mean that in a bad way, but if anybody knows the history of my teacher, right, he had a really bad stomach illness way back in the 60s. And he actually gave his closest students Menkyo Kaiden way back then, 60s or 70s, that kind of thing, right? Because he just wasn't sure. And here we are, right? Way, way past that. So it's all good. All right. Anyway, got my trusty producer, Ninja in the Wings, Sensei Alexander. I almost called you Shidoshi. Maybe that's a sign of things to come. Who knows, right? Anyway, so who's on? Who do I need to say hi to? I see we have a decent number already signed in, so that's cool. Throw the right topics out there, the right wording and things, and people's ears perk up. Yeah. Anyway, who's on?
Oh, so we got Alan, Carrie from New Zealand,
Cool.
Kyle, Terrence, Victor. Alan said the new look is cool. Victor said, I love the nin in the Enso. Looks classy.
Doing my best. As classy goes, right? That's what I was going for with the Hunko look as well, just to kind of bridge that gap between it's almost like if I were gonna, and I used a term a bunch of years ago, but I didn't stay with it. And I think it suits us at this point, that ancient warrior, modern man. And no, ladies, I'm not excluding you. But what we're looking at is how to apply these timeless principles and concepts, right, in today's world, right? Because Trinity, my daughter, and I were just having this conversation yesterday that she's got this focus. She's graduated from Georgetown. Has this specialty in, well, psychology and all this kind of stuff, but more directed for like the intelligence sector, right? And so she's writing papers, and as a matter of fact, she's back in DC now. I don't know if she's on for the podcast or not, but she's in DC. She's at a conference tomorrow and Wednesday. That's focused around this stuff. And again, like I said, she's writing a paper. She's started writing a book in this direction, leaders and whatnot in that sector. And what she's doing is bridging the gap between all of these timeless, proven warrior insights and lessons and principles, and looking at how they get applied, or they can be applied in today's world, right? And when people kind of stray from the principles, right? How we end up getting, some of the problems we've been getting, right? It's kind of like The Art of War. The Art of War is one of those interesting books to most people, right? But The Art of War by Sun Tzu was required reading, right? Way back in the day. And as a matter of fact, Napoleon, lots of generals, right? I believe Patton was a big fan. But Napoleon, right, fought every one of his battles based on the principles of the art of war and never lost until Waterloo, right? He deviated from the principles at Waterloo, and what happened, James? Got his ass handed to him. That's what happened. So, really cool stuff. The first version of that, the first translation I ever had of The Art of War. I think I know the translation was by is it Thomas Clavel? Yeah, yeah, he was the one that did Shogun and those kind of things. Really, really good translator and whatnot. And within that, there he interspersed actual historical moments and references to Japanese and Chinese generals. Uh, there may be some Western ones in there as well, but when the principles, like to reinforce it, you read this thing and then like use this story to reinforce how those things were applied and whatnot successfully. So anyway, cool stuff, and you'll find references to it in classic works like the Banzai Chukai, things like that. And if it's not a direct reference, like a quote, right? There'll be a reference to Sun Tzu with his Japanese name, but there'll be a reference to like understanding the principles of, right? Every good general heeds these lessons, kind of thing, right? So anyway, cool stuff. All right. So anybody else sign in that I need to say hi to, or
Nobody else has checked in yet. No.
All right, cool. All right, no problem. So let me just bring up my notes and jump into things because you know, if I don't, I tend to stray. All right. So most people, now again, all of this stuff, right? I mean, how do I say this without sounding or without coming across the wrong way? Well, I'll just say it this way, right? My podcast, our podcast. So, of course, this is always based on my observations, my interpretation of lessons from my teacher or teachers on both sides, right? The Mikyo side and the Ninpo side. My own research, my own real world experience as a, Army cop and being in law enforcement, security, and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's the best I can do with it, right? But again, based on those things, right? It's been my observation that most people believe that when something goes wrong, they'll figure it out. As a matter of fact, I can say that this is my opinion and observation, but I don't think we've mentioned it in quite a while. But I think it was Harvard did a study on a graduating class, and this was a long-term study. James, you remember the one I'm talking about, right? Where they tracked these graduates from the time they were seniors, right, for like 20 years. And they found that the people that wrote down their goals, as in like very specific, right, as in like they were transcribing a vision, right, wrote it down, developed a plan, acted on the plan. 20 years later, right, it was only like 1 or 2% of the graduating class, but that 1 or 2%, their net worth and their experiences in life and those kind of things, right, were more than the sum total of the rest of the graduating class. Okay. Anyway, so there's this thing, right? I mean, most people fly by the seat of their pants. Okay. I have, right. I think most people have, and then hopefully some of us figure it out. Right. Is it Zig Ziglar? There's been a couple of different mentors that I've had, but there's this saying that if you plan to fail, or if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. Right. Anyway, right. So again, when things go wrong, people tend to just kind of have this idea that, and we have lots of sayings for it, right? We'll cross that bridge when we get there. We'll worry about that when the time comes, that kind of stuff, right? But when it actually happens, right? When something breaks, right? When something unexpected hits, when something demands immediate action, right? They don't think, they react. And I get it, right? We're warriors. We're supposed to go, you react, right? You just react. Okay. And I guess doing something's better than doing nothing at all. But we have to remember that reactions come in different flavors. Okay. So when I say that they react, what I mean is they panic, they freeze, or they start doing something, right? Anything, right? Because that feels like they're doing something. Of course, right? But that's where things get worse, right? And the problem may get solved. The problem usually gets solved, right? Eventually, right? Um, but what ends up happening is it gets prolonged, or there's more damage done in the process, right? Um, you know, we have to we create these other fires that we have to go around and put out because of our stress or our lack of anger management or emotional regulation and those kind of things, right? It's just right. Um, but the thing is that the problem is not the situation, right? The problem to be solved is not the situation, especially under high tension, extreme moments, right? The problem to be solved is what happens next. Okay? What happens next, right? And so, uh, if anybody saw the title for this thing, it's right. It's keys for handling, you know, surviving in an emergency. Okay, but before we go any further, right? I think it'd be a really good idea if we define what I mean by an emergency, because when people hear terms like survival, right, they think wilderness survival, urban survival, right? They think natural disasters, they think extreme situations, those kind of things. But that's not what I'm talking about. Okay. Now, it could be those things, right? But more often than not, for most people, most of the time, it's more mundane, more everyday life stuff, right? But it doesn't make it any less of an emergency when it's happening, right? So let's define an emergency as any situation that shocks your system and demands immediate action. Okay. So, of course, since we're coming at it from a martial arts or self protection standpoint, right, it could be a physical threat, right? And again, that's where most people's head go, right? But it could also be a sudden financial problem, could be a relationship breakdown, right? Could be a health issue, anything that disrupts your normal state and forces a response. Okay. So the common factor isn't the situation, right? It's the disruption and the need to act. Okay. And in those moments, we talk about this all the time. Most people don't rise to the occasion. Most people react. And that reaction is what creates the real problem. Okay. Creates things that have to be solved before the actual thing can be solved. Okay. So, what I'm going to share uh, during this episode comes from a framework that I have taught for years. It was developed during a period where I was training with Stephen Hayes, the guy who brought Ninjutsu to America way back in the day, and I was actually in his Marishi Kai Instructors Guild. And so there were these student workbooks and whatnot that I found extremely helpful, which is why I have gone on to create many, many more, right? Worksheets, guides, workbooks, and things like that for my students. Okay. And so this particular framework is called the Zanzon Ho no Tejun in Japanese. Okay? So if you're trying to spell it out, it's Zanzon, Zanzon, Ho, Ho, right? Not the other type. No, No, Tejun, Tejun. Okay. So I'm going to break that down a little bit so that we understand that what it is. But conventionally, when I give it to students, what I'm giving them, and right now I have a workbook that I'm not completely redoing, but I am upgrading it, right? And so here within this week, it'll be upgraded. I just did an additional class on it that I did for my Friday Inner Circle coaching group, and I will be doing part 2. So the part 1 that I did with the Friday group was on the conventional side of this, right? Because the Zanzon Ho no Tejun workbook or guide is based on the 9 initial steps for successful survival, right? And we're talking about typically wilderness survival, right? Emergency survival. The one I'll be doing with my Inner Circle group tomorrow will convert the same framework to urban survival. Okay. What I'll be doing during this particular episode is honing in on the first 3 steps, which are universal to all situations, including all this life stuff I've been talking about. Okay. And if we can get a handle on these, you know, it's saying, right? In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, right? You will be far and ahead of well over 90% of the people out there trying to force things to happen. Okay. Anyway, so before we take a look at this, before we dive into that a little bit more deeply, let's look at the components, right? Conceptually, right? The kanji that make up this Japanese term, right? And I don't mean like dictionary style, right? I mean what's being pointed to, right? Because ultimately, even though I do this live and as in a video format for folks that show up that way, and it ends up, residing on YouTube and on our website, ultimately, most people end up seeing this on the audio only podcast directories, whether it's Apple Podcast or iHeartRadio or Pandora or blah, blah, blah. Right. So I don't think it would serve us for me to put the kanji up. I may at some point convert maybe this section or whatever into an article or something for the blog, but at the moment, it's not necessary, right? What I want to do is I want to take a look at I'll break down the words, right? We'll take a look at Zanzon, we'll take a look at Ho, and we'll take a look at Tejun to get a better understanding of what's going on. Because if we just look at it and then assume that we're talking about 9 steps, well, the word ku or q isn't in there anywhere, right? Or that we're talking about survival the way, or limited to just the way that like a survival prepper might look at it, right? Can it be? Of course, right? This is our introduction. Anybody that is in the full program with me and decides to add this module on, everybody starts with the 9 initial steps, because it's not just a guide for when we're going through a situation like that, but just like all of our other frameworks, it directs our training to make sure that we're not missing anything, right? So anyway, that being said, and you know what, before I jump into this, James, anybody else jump on that I should say hi to?
Dave, Trinity, and Richard Demio.
Cool. Anybody like speak up and say that they've never had a problem that hasn't like crept up on them or like smacked them in the face, or personally, me, I've a couple of fires and somebody showing up one day and going, hey, I think I want a divorce. Okay. I mean, one I saw coming. The other one was, well, actually, that wasn't, I want a divorce. Turned into one because they were doing stuff they weren't supposed to be doing. Anyway, anybody like perfect out there that are just like listening in, but none of this resonates?
Well, they haven't said anything. I'm sure they think they are.
I was going to say, so just you, right? You haven't had anything sneak up on you recently?
No, not at all.
No, it's all good. Yeah, no, I was just talking to your wife the other day. Yeah, you'd be lying. So anyway, all right. So let's take a look and we'll break this Japanese term down. So it gives a little bit, or sheds a little bit more light on where we're going with this. Okay. So the word Zanzon could be written out with a couple of different kanji, but either way, if we translate this, Zanzon can mean remaining. It can mean survival. It can mean like what's left, right? What continues, right, after an event, right? And so conceptually, it's closer to the idea of remaining intact or continuing under adverse conditions, that kind of idea. Okay. The ability to continue to operate even when shit's not going well. Okay. Remaining intact, not falling apart, not crumbling, right? Not vaporizing or, just shutting ourselves down because we're lost, we're stuck, we're enraged, whatever. Okay. So that's Zanzon. Okay. Whole, most people who know the kanji for ninpo, right? That po is a linguistic alteration because of the word before it, right? Nin. But it can be translated as method, can be translated as law, as in like a universal principle, universal law kind of thing, right? Can be translated as principle, can be translated as way, that kind of thing, right? But when I say method, because ninpo, right? Ninja methods. Yeah, now it's closer to law, principles, things that don't break under pressure, right? You could strip everything else away. You could change how it looks or whatever, right? 50,000 different ways, and the principle is still the same, right? So it's more than these individual pieces. It's more like a principled method or a governing approach. Okay. So at least these folks that keep throwing shit together, right, and coming up with their own brand of Ninjutsu and Nimpo or whatever, right? What they see is a bunch of skill sets, but what they don't see is the unifying principles, right, that make the ones that are a part of authentic Ninjutsu belong there. Right? It's kind of like when I cover the Ninja Hachimon, right? These 8 gates of the ninja. Some of you have the worksheet that I made that takes there's 3 columns. So the left column, sorry for you, the left column has the original 8 gates, right? And we have to recognize that was the technology of the day. So when people look at that stuff and go, "Oh, nobody does things like that anymore." Well, they're right, but they're also missing a big piece, right? So what people do is they see that stuff and they go, "Well, in today's world, we'll just put this in there, we'll put that in there, but the middle column on the worksheet, right? I do have things listed on the right side, okay, for modern day. But what I have in the middle column is the principles and the reasoning behind the original 8. Okay. So that we can authentically and correctly translate this stuff into the modern world and not look at it and go, "Well, see, nobody does that," or this thing here. I mean, unless you're, there's no point in doing stealth training in today's world. I mean, unless you're like breaking into people's houses. And then they just stare at me like, those crickets, early morning kind of things, or at night, dead silent, but, the crickets going on when I go, what if you needed to sneak out of an area because people were trying to hunt you down, right? What if they broke into your house and confronting them was not a good idea? Because if you die, then who's protecting your family? And you need to hide or get out or whatever, right? And the reason why things kind of lock up is because people they make a snap judgment, which is what we're talking about here, okay? Where things get stuck, right? Anyway, so whole, right, is principled method. It's a governing approach, right? Yes, it's a method or a series of methods or ways or whatever, but there is a defining structure to it, right? It's not an unbroken structure. It's not like a style where things have to look a certain way. That's not what we're talking about. Okay. And that's what throws most people off who come from other martial arts. I know it did me. Throws them off when they come to this one where, but, but like everything looks different. What do you mean there's a unifying principle, right? Or are we allowed to do it this way? Or, that kind of thing. It just kind of gets in the way, right? So anyway, Zanzon Ho, right? And then no is just a connecting word, right? It's a, uh, for those of you who know what I'm talking about, it's like a preposition kind of thing, right? It shows ownership, right? So here's where the things come in, right? Tejun, Tejun, Tejun means procedure. It means sequence, like ordered steps, right? That kind of thing, right? So, um, like the 9 steps to initial, or the 9 initial steps to effective, right? We also have another one that is the 9 initial steps to effective emergency first aid. Right? Same thing, okay? Because I think warriorship needs to be about self-protection in all forms, or protection of others in all forms, and not just ducking punches and not getting stabbed in the gut or shot in the face or whatever, right? Especially in today's world, right? But anyway, if we put all this together, right, and continue on with this conceptual meaning, right, a better understanding of Zanzon Ho no Teijun is like an ordered method for maintaining continuity, or for maintaining survival, or continued survival, right? Or it could mean a sequential method for remaining functional, that kind of thing, right? Um, Maybe better functional translations, at least for our use, right? That are much closer to what we call things, or what we're pointing to in the Warrior Concepts Mastery curriculum, right? Would be like a sequential method for survival under pressure, or an ordered system for maintaining control and surviving, right? Or survival, or a step-by-step method for remaining functional when things go wrong, when things go sideways, right? So what we're really talking about is a decision-making framework, right? A thinking system, or even a method of control under disruption, under chaos, right? So when I refer to Zanzon Ho no Teijun, I'm not talking about a survival manual, right? Even though like I said, I have a student guide, right, with this name as a place to start. But I'm not talking about a survival manual, right? I'm talking about a structured way to remain functional when things go to shit, right? Use that as a definition, right? It's not a list of survival techniques, although there are survival skills listed, right? It's a sequence for staying operational under pressure. So, in effect, it's no different than our PX8 system, or our 8 phases of effective uh, self defense strategy and training, right? It's it's no different, right? It's a structured sequence that makes sure that we don't miss anything. Okay, but like I said, it was originally taught within literal survival training, right? Wilderness survival training, within the ninjutsu that I inherited, right? And of course, within the Warrior Concepts wilderness survival training program, right? But here's the important part, right? This is not just about survival, wilderness, urban, or otherwise. Okay, this is about what to do when anything suddenly goes wrong. Okay, so before I kind of outline the Zanzon Ho framework, I'm going to do it from a high level kind of thing. Anybody that wants the workbook and stuff, like I said, it'll be available here soon. But anybody have any questions up to this point? Right? Anybody need clarification? James, anything?
Terrence asked, You once mentioned this concept of endurance tactics. One of these tactics you called Kaifuku Yuroku, or recovery healing power. With this, Zanzon Ho no Tejun be an example of one of these tactics, or am I off base?
Yeah, no, you're putting the cart before the horse. So there's always overlap, right? There's not a hard wall between them, but the recovery stuff um, is in not getting. It's a different type of not getting stuck, right? Because people can get stuck in survival mode, okay, but that was what I was describing early on, where people are just they're you know they're in that, we'll cross that bridge when we get there, we'll worry about that when it happens, whatever, that kind of thing. And then they can't figure out why they're always putting out fires, why their life is just an ongoing experience of same shit different day, or different shit different day, right? There's been no development of skills for recovery. Okay. Zanzon Ho no Tejun is, it actually starts with the shock and awe moment and requires an orientation and then a series of steps for uh, for not dying before the problem has been resolved. Okay, so there is crossover, um, but what you're asking about is more of a resilience thing on the tail end. Okay, yeah. So, anything else, James?
No other questions. Just Maury's checked in. Said good evening.
Cool. All right. Hi, Maury. All right. So, at a high level, this is a 9-step system, right? It's not a 12-step recovery system, but it's a 9-step system. Okay. So, what we're really talking about is this system moves from gaining control of a chaotic situation and then moving into a maintenance stage, right? To maintaining function even while there's still um, some disorientation, there's danger is still present, that kind of stuff, right? And then continuing to move toward resolution, right? Getting it handled. Okay. Um, a lot of people believe that like you have to stop, sort it all out and whatnot, and you know, develop clarity and have a plan and all that kind of stuff before you can move forward. But the reality is that some situations do require action now. So this framework is about training certain things into play. During Whiteboard Wednesday and during the Friday masterclass this week, I'm going to be taking a look at this from we'll look at some a technique or two, but they're going to be more in drill form. And what I mean by that is we're going to insert some chaos, and we're going to see how the systems for many people have been developed to the point where they don't have the skill sets necessary for getting some kind of clarity or some kind of input during the chaos. And so they either freeze up, they back up, as in like cover up, back up, oh shit, that kind of thing, or um, everything just goes to what my grandfather used to call assholes in tin cups, or assholes over tin cups. And what I mean by that is they, flailing happens, or they default straight to like whoop ass and stuff like that, right? So anyway, I'll do that more when we're in the actual physical self-defense realm, starting with Whiteboard Wednesday. But um, what we're really talking about here is moving from what we're really talking about is acting because action is necessary, but acting in ways and running a process that actually allows us to be productive and move forward in the face of chaos. Okay. Right. So we're not throwing gasoline on the fire. We're not jumping conclusions, but we're also not hesitating. And this is where a lot of people get thrown off because they think that if I'm talking about like, um, you know, doing things to allow for clarity so I can move in the right direction and stuff like that, right? Then I must either be hesitating or stopping to make sense of things. But sometimes if you stop, like, the bullet goes through you and then you'll be stopped forever. Right. So it's not that kind of thing. What we're talking about here is being able to operate in a way that we can establish like a baseline equilibrium. Okay. Some balance, some internal clarity, some internal balance and whatnot, right? Um, and continue to do that, right? To give ourselves time to get uh, more clarity about what's going on. Right? I was going to hold this story until Whiteboard Wednesday, but I'll share it now. Um, to put this into better perspective, I was an Army cop, but I had taken some time away from that duty. And for anybody that was ever in the military, in the Army, we called it CQ, charge of quarters. So it's a non-commissioned officer who is kind of in charge overnight when command is out of the building, right? They work 6 to 5 or 7 to whatever, right? But at the end of the day, when the company commander and the first sergeant and operations and all that, when they leave for the day, right, then there's this lone charge of quarters and usually a runner or two who is there to help clean the place overnight or whatever, right? But answer the phones if an alert happens. Or we used to say if the balloon went up, then they initiate the call chain and all that kind of stuff, right? Just make sure shit doesn't happen. And so I pulled one of these long duties, and we had an alert in the morning. So instead of getting off when everybody came in the morning, I made the phone call. So everybody's in, all that kind of stuff. We had to go through. It ended up being a drill, which was great. But we went through an entire day. So I have been up for well over 24 hours. And now it's 7 o'clock at night. And I'm finally released I can go home because my relief has come. And I remember walking along. Some of you guys may know this story, but anyway, I'm walking along the hallway toward glass door at the end, and the walls are along to the right side, and main walkways through and whatnot, offices on either side. And these two guys come walking in. They have been off for a while, lucky them, long enough to go to the PX annex where they could pick up a case of beer and come back. And it was the start of a weekend, so they were going to relax. Anyway, I'm in deep thought because I know I'm going to go home. I'm going to get a good night's sleep. I've got a couple of days off. What am I doing with the family? That kind of thing. And next thing I know, I hear something like, "And as for you," or something like that, right? And these arms are just coming at me. And I instinctively just dropped into a hoko, and I'm dealing with these arms. And next thing I know, we're slipping a mushadori on, and I'm laying this guy out on the floor, and I'm straddling him, and I got an arm ready to go, got a fist ready to go. And I hear, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa. I was just joking." And immediately I geared down, right? I looked at him. He was in defensive mode, geared down. This is another Army cop, right? So anyway, he never did that again. But anyway, I realized that there was no threat, that like this surprising moment was something that it wasn't an attack, right? And so I smiled and said, "Oh, yeah, me too." Patted him on the cheek and got up and walked out. So, but the point here is that, like, I didn't have absolute clarity that this was not an attack until that point, right? My recollection of that moment, because, like, again, I remember like using Hoko because I was on the inside, my arms were up to cover, but I don't remember all the moves and things like that, or even like how I even felt the Mushadori and whatnot. Either way, um, but we ended up in this position. So let there be a note for you too. All these people that say you can't do that shit in a bad thing. The number of times I put Mushadori on somebody in bad situations, without trying to put it on, but just recognizing it and whatever. Um, so they can believe what they want. So anyway, right? But what was programmed in, and again, I'm going to talk about more of this during Whiteboard Wednesday. There are these kihon no kihon, like non-negotiable fundamentals that form what everybody tends to think of as the fundamentals, right? Instinctive knee bend, maintaining balance, those kind of things, right? Kamae being the flinch response, that they're the things that are operating while the brain and body and the system are trying to figure out what the hell's going on, right? Because if I were the typical fighter mentality, right? This thing happens, I get this guy to the floor and just keep wailing on him, right? And then I find out that, well, he was just joking or whatever, and then what do? Right? Well, your fucking fault. You shouldn't have done it. Except that, yeah, try to defend that, right? In court, legally, financially, all those kind of things. I know a lot of people have tried to make sense out of it, but it's not quite so simple, right? So this is this way, right? And so Whiteboard Wednesday, I'll kind of talk about some of this stuff, and then for Friday's session, there's a couple of drills, right? And one of them I call friend or foe, and three people are involved. One person is the quote unquote defender, but friend or foe, right? The defender has to leave the room, and so these people determine who's friend, who's foe. And then once they decide that, then they're going to decide who's actually doing the quote unquote attack, except only one of them is an attack, except both of these things look exactly the same. There's a grab and a yank to the side, and then one of them is going to throw a punch, and the other one is going to pat him on the shoulder because they might have just yanked him out of traffic so they can get run over by something they didn't see. But if we have a default mechanism where if somebody puts their hands on me, I beat the shit out of them, well, then in certain cases, both of us get fucking run over in the street. So while we can justify things, right? This is one of those things I'm talking about in the current intro, that leads into the podcast, where I talk about how do we do all these things without becoming paranoid fighters ourselves, right? Where I have such a fear of losing that I'll do anything to quote unquote win, except that I can be beating the living shit out of my friend who's trying to save my life or whatever. But all it takes for me to just wig out is to, for a moment of chaos to happen, right? Or to melt down or whatever. Okay. And so that's what we're talking about here. Okay. To not be led astray by a lack of preparedness, right? And so a lot of people think that, in those moments of chaos, there's nothing for you to do, right? You're going to do what you can do. I agree. And if there's nothing trained into that moment, yeah, then whatever comes out, hope it all works out for you. Not you, because you guys are all enlightened, but you know what I'm saying, right? So again, this framework takes you from like, oh shit moment to establishing like baseline equilibrium, right? At least you're still there and you're functioning, right? To using life-sustaining skills to keep going, and then into long-term actions that allow us to not just survive, but to successfully resolve the problem and get back to comfort, safety, and where that event is behind us and stuff like that. And that's kind of where Terrence was asking about this other thing, that there is some overlap, but since the thing he was talking about can be seen as just like Mushin and Fudoshin and Zanshin and all that, often people can recite what they are and they can discuss them and whatnot, but they tend to stay in the realm of conceptual things, right? They don't know how to train to make it happen. They don't train. I mean, Zanshin, right? Awareness. Yeah. Pay attention. It's not so simple. Okay. Because I promise you, if you're paying attention left brain wise, you're either going to get seriously overwhelmed, or the moment one of these moments happen that I'm talking about, right? That and left brain takes a vacation. Well, then that kind of Zanshin, that very surface level kind of thing, goes with it. Okay. So here's where most people go wrong, right? And we'll do this from a wilderness survival perspective, because I don't want to jump around to a bunch of different perspectives. In an upcoming episode, I'm not sure if it's going to be the next one or whatever, we'll take a look at this from where it's not like situational, it's not survival, that kind of thing. The problem is people, but that one's, people really have to get their head wrapped around it. So when I get the workbook, the guide updated, right, I'm adding some extra sections in it, reinforcing things and whatnot, so it's not so skeletal. Very much like the Seishin Teki Kyoyo book, but not as thick. There'll be that, and then if anybody wants to kind of grab if you're not in the inner circle, if you want to grab the one or the other of those classes that walk you through those frameworks, then great, that'll be available too. But either way, the place where people go wrong, right, from a wilderness survival perspective, is that they focus on skills, they focus on gear, they focus on techniques, right? Steps 4 through 9, right? Really quick outline, right? Steps 4 through 9 include things like shelter building, fire building, water collection and purification, food collection, which could be could require things like plant identification and foraging, could include building of traps and things like that, right? Medical considerations, and land navigation, which is using maps and compasses to not get fucking lost, right? So they tend to focus on those kind of things, right? And they either learn one or a couple in each category, and then that becomes their favorite, but they never go on to learn that many skills are regional. Plant identification is regional, right? So if we find ourselves in a region that doesn't have what we're used to, shit, now what, right? But they learn those, or they learn a couple, or they just randomly, haphazardly learn a bunch of things, but they're never put into a context. Like in fire building, we teach 9 different structures: star pattern, lean-to, all these things, right? Some of the patterns have nothing to do with the fire itself. They have to do with drying fuel that's wet, or setting up the fire and whatnot, so that if you have to leave base camp, since heat goes up and fire burns up, if I have a structure like that, it's going to burn way faster than if I have it burned down into fuel, that kind of stuff, right? Or having to worry about damp ground, because if I build a fire structure on damp ground, as that convection process happens, it pulls the damp moisture, the wet air out of the ground, and it snuffs the fire, right? So how do I handle that, right? So different things, right? There's a pattern for concentrating heat for cooking. There's a pattern for when fuel is at a premium, right? I don't have a lot, right? And so I have to have a pattern or a structure that allows me to conserve fuel while maintaining fire. There's considerations for 3 different survival uh, paradigms, right? One is just general training. One is a true emergency survival situation, right? So when I'm building a fire and whatnot, right? I want to be seen. So what conditions or what kind of fire do I need, or how do I produce certain things so that I'm more likely to be seen during bright daylight hours or the darkness of night? Okay. Most people don't think about those things. And then there's also, I used to call it paramilitary. Now we're going to call it um, something like emergency, like you're being pursued, right? And so you don't want to be found. That's just the opposite, right? So now I still might need fire for heat, warmth, those kind of things, right? Water purification, those kind of things. But if I'm being actively pursued, shit, now I've got the opposite problem. I don't want to be found, but I still need warmth. I still need comfort. I still need, right? And the same thing covers across shelter building. It covers, a bunch of these things, right? So again, people can stack skills upon skills upon skills, but there's no context. It's kind of like learning all the kamae, learning the different forms of uke nagash, learning the different throws or whatever, but there's no context. So they got a shit ton of skills, but they never develop the assessment and determining abilities under chaos to not just randomly pick something and hope it works. Okay. And I'm not knocking anybody, right? If they weren't taught any better or they're not naturally intuitive, it's probably not going to stick out, right? But those are the things that are necessary to move somebody into mastery level, not number of techniques, not number of, right? Not, well, I got a bug out kit and I've got filtration straws or I have chemical tablets for purifying water. Well, that's all great. Unless they get lost, they get broken, or like filtration straws only last for so long before they don't filter anything, right? Let alone some of them won't even suck the water through, right? Purification tablets, right? Eventually you're going to run out, or if they get wet or they get whatever, right? So it's one of the reasons I teach from a primitive, almost a caveman thing, where if you have these things, awesome, they'll give you some time, right? They'll give you a buffer. But anything beyond that, well, shit, if I can't do it without them, then I don't really have the skill, right? My skill of water purification requires gear or some technology that I have to bring with me. And that stops working, gets lost, gets broken, or whatever, then I really don't have a skill. What I have is a crutch. It's the same thing for folks that like need the kata, or they get stuck on the kata, or the other extreme is they don't use the framework. They don't believe in them. So they don't have a process for making sense out of chaos, which is one of the definitions I give to kata, right? It's a way to show you how to make sense out of chaos, right? But either way, right? They're got lots of shit going on in steps 4 through 9, but they completely skip the first 3 steps that determine everything that follows. Okay. And again, these 3 steps match our phase 1, our general awareness phase in our PX8 framework, right? Which itself determines not only what we do, but how we train in and for everything else that follows. Okay. For those of you who are new to this, the general awareness phase is not what most people think of when we talk about awareness. That's phase 2, situational awareness, paying attention to one's surroundings. General awareness is understanding the problem, how those problems can manifest in the different variations, looking at attacker types, scenarios, those kind of things. And right, that's why the PX8 system, the 8 phases, has a post-incident recovery phase that could be my own personal PTSD. It could be dealing with other people around me that are traumatized, family members now that are afraid, don't want to get near me, whatever. There's a bunch of other things that are in there as well. And also phase 8 is dealing with the legal system that's supposed to be there to protect all of us, but it could backfire on us, right? Or your job has a morals clause, or now coworkers are afraid, so you get terminated without cause or with cause, whatever. I just, again, it allows somebody to focus on this from a big picture to make sure we're not missing something that can sneak up and bite us in the ass. Okay. But again, right, without this part of either framework, everything else is just guessing and random collecting, right? Hoping we're prepared for the real thing. Okay. So, in short, most people most people don't plan at all. But of those who do, most of them focus on what to do. They never establish how to decide what needs to be done, so that they're not just effective and they handle the problem, but they do it with the least amount of wear and tear on them on the problem or in the process, right? They don't create, uh, you know, extra shit, right? They don't cause more fires that they got to put out. That, I apologize. I didn't mean it. And see, I have a problem with anybody that apologizes and says they didn't mean something that came out of their face. If it's not in there, if it's not in our head, right, one way or another, it can't possibly come out. So anything we say to anybody, right, anything we pull the trigger on, figuratively, right, anything we say during an argument to win, right, any attempt to take it back later or apologize, I didn't really mean it. Yeah, you did. Because the only thing that was important was winning the argument, not long-term maintenance of the relationship. And then when the person goes, you know what, I'm out. Well, then now we got another fire to put out. Holy shit, where'd that come from? Gee, I don't know. You blowing up the house every time things don't go well, right? So anyway, again, the problem starts with most people focusing on what to do, and not developing the skills or whatever to establish how to decide, right? What needs to be done, right? What's the problem at hand? What's the thing that needs to be done now? They're so afraid of collapsing and this bad outcome happening or whatever. So they're just running around trying to prevent that from happening. That they don't focus on, and they don't know how to prioritize the thing that needs to be done now. Okay. So again, this is that hamster on the wheel kind of thing, right? Under pressure, right? What do people do, right? They try harder, they move faster, they do more, but there's no direction, right? And I know the hamster on the wheel seems like he has direction because he's running in one direction, but the wheel only turns that way. Okay. What I'm talking about is they hop on this freaking wheel, right? They run their little freaking feet off, right? It's a lot of movement, a lot of effort, no real progress, right? They're going nowhere fast. Okay. Then they burn out and they hop off and they wander around, they eat, sleep, and poop and try again. Right. But like I said, there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of effort, no real progress, right? Because movement is not progress. Effort is not effectiveness. Well, at least you tried. Okay. Thanks. Appreciate it. Was that it? That was your pep talk? Okay. Didn't help. Okay. Movement's not progress. Effort's not effectiveness. All right. I would be remiss if I forgot to do this again, but if you're finding value in these episodes, you know how this thing works, right? Help me manipulate the platform algorithms by convincing them that this stuff is important, especially, and I'm not looking for this to be important for everybody. I'm not looking for millions of views. I'm not one of these internet influencers, right? I'm looking to help the right people, the right mindset, right? That, like you guys, right? So if you haven't already, right, hit like, subscribe, whatever platform you're on. Ring. If you're on YouTube, is there like a bell over there to ring or something? I don't know. Right. Leave a comment. That way, the algorithms learn things. Right. You're not just helping me. You're helping you. Right. Because it'll show you our stuff more often. Right. Without you having to hunt and peck for it. But also, these platforms will show others who these programs know everything about us. So that are like us, right? That are looking for this level of training. Okay. Anyway, all right. Like I said, if it's hitting home for you, if you found yourself doing more and more getting nowhere, right? Hit like, drop a comment, make sure you're subscribed. Okay. Anyway, all right. So that being said, James, any questions or comments before I make a little kata skill collection connection ish kind of thing at the moment?
Alan said the moment of chaos I faced would have been the October 1989 prison riot. Lots of oh shit moments during and after. Because at one point the report came out that inmates were taking CO uniforms and they were also dressing hostages as inmates. We had to identify friend or foe ASAP.
Yeah. Cool. I mean, not cool that you went through it, but also cool that you went through it. Okay. And that's certainly one thing that we could be aimed at. But what I'm also pointing to here is, right, we've all had things. Okay? I'll talk about one here in a minute that's way closer to home. Okay? Other than the fires and stuff that we've had to put up with. James, you were in for one of them. Not that he caused it, but as a matter of fact, thanks, Alan, right? Had Alan not told us 5 minutes into the start of KUDEN that night, we would have not known until when? The next day when I went in to open the dojo for classes. Yeah. So anyway, but we all had these things on a regular basis. Okay? It doesn't have to be Taj Mahal size, but yeah. So you had one of those moments. Lots of people have had things that size as well. But at the same time, let's not write off the everyday incidents that cause us to have a meltdown or, I don't know, feel like we need to go talk to a counselor or something, right? Because shit happens, right? Anyway, anything else? Anybody else?
Victor asked, is this the same concept as Fudoshin, a mind that does not lose itself?
In a way. But it's actually closer to Mushin. Mushin is being undisturbed. We want to get to a point where Fudoshin kicks in, where we're okay with chaos going on around us. Okay. Yeah. Again, it's kind of like Terrence's thing. It's in there, but there's a lot of other things going on. Okay. To get to Fudoshin, there's another stage that Manaka Sensei talked about in his book that like Trin fell in love with because she's all like in the psychology and all that. Trin, do you still have my book? I bet you do. Anyway, so anyway, there's this stage called Heijoshin. Heijoshin, Heijoshin. Heijoshin means common mind or everyday mind. Okay, and what we're talking about there is getting to a point where like most of you understand this who've been training for a while, right? Fist, feet, whatever coming at you it's an everyday occurrence, or it's a part of your everyday regular life, right? So, but for a lot of people, if somebody hauled off and even like brandished a fist or pulled a knife or whatever, right? They would crap themselves, right? They would melt down, or they would, go off the deep end or whatever. Heijoshin is, for a warrior, it's getting these things and responses to things just like it's an everyday occurrence. Okay. Hopefully that helped. Because a lot of these things, they bleed over. Like to get to Fudoshin, you have to have Mushin, Heijoshin, these kind of things, because it naturally produces this this immovable heart mind kind of thing. When here's an example of Fudoshin, when 9/11 occurred. Okay, as soon as I saw news reports, especially of the plane, the various earliest reports was that it, the one plane went down just outside of Pittsburgh. There was nothing about Somerset. There was nothing about anything like that. And as a matter of fact, the initial things was that it was shot down, right, because it was on an entry path to come into D.C. Anyway, my oldest daughter was in a school just outside of Pittsburgh, so I didn't have a reference point for where. So I immediately went into action and tried to call the school. Well, what I got was just one point, it was just the phones ringing, and then there was another point where the phones were, I got a busy signal, which, if you know anything about the old landline system, if the phones aren't plugged in, you get like, it just rings, right? Because nobody's picking up. But there could also be situations where either somebody wanted to hang up a phone, or it didn't completely get hung up, or if you didn't want to talk to anybody back in the day, you just fucking left your phone off the hook, right? I just put mine on silent mode. But anyway, and then you get this busy signal, right? Which now I've got an either or, right? I've got, do they just evacuate, or are they shelter in place and nobody's near a phone to answer, or has the school been vaporized, right? So once I found out Somerset, once I found out a couple other details and whatnot, Dad could relax a little bit. But I was in like phone calling mode, calling ex-wife, daughter's mom, just trying to get some information. Not panic, just I needed clarity, right? I needed to know. Right? So I can't solve that big problem, but I can solve for next. Okay. But then I get this call from my brother, who is absolutely panicking, right? And now my it wasn't panic. It wasn't panic. Heart rate went up a little bit of stress and whatnot, because I need to figure out status of my daughter, right? But I'm not panicking. Just no different than any other police work day or bodyguard assignment where shit went a little sideways and whatnot. But either way, right? But there was this whole other level of equilibrium, right? There was never a thought about, oh my God, you see what happened? And there was a shit, right? And then there was this mind that was calculating next, right? And so, but my brother called, and he was just in an absolute panic, right? He's just like, I can't believe that somebody would do this because of their ideology and stuff. And I remember distinctly just saying, dude, I don't know where you've been. There have been stories like this in the news all over the world, damn near every day, if not every week. The only thing that's people panicking now is it happened here. But I had the same feeling when Columbine happened. For anybody that remembers those, right? The school shooting, right? That started the whole thing off. I was on a panel. I was asked to be on a panel here locally. There's just this overriding question, like, why do you think this happened? Why now? And all that kind of stuff. And, I let the other four panelists answer things and whatever. And I said, I hope this doesn't come across the wrong way, but I've been in places and I've seen things. And like, I grew up in inner city schools. Okay. And so, I mean no disrespect, but when you ask, why is this happening? Why did it happen now? This happens all the time. What woke people up was it happened to white people white kids in a place that was like our quiet, calm community. So what woke everybody up and what caused the panic was, oh shit, it can happen to us and it can happen here. That's Fudoshin. Because during it, there were questions, right? Can I help? And that's too far away. What can I do to assist with clarity? Right? So there's overlap, but the Fudoshin was the thing that was causing most people to panic or most people to shit a breadbasket or whatever. There's part of that was Heijoshin as well. Does that make me cold to things? No. It makes me able to operate in spite of things. Okay. So, anything else, James?
Victor said, "Thank you for the clarity."
I do the best I can. I really recommend the book by Manaka Sensei. He retired when Trend 2024, maybe. Trend's really trying to talk to him because of all of his research and that kind of stuff. She's like vibrating in her seat. I'm sure she is right now because she was last night when we were talking. Anyway, so let's move on and we'll see. I'll take any other questions later, right? But like I said, this isn't new, right? Just like I related this framework to the PX8 system, right? This problem with people collecting skills and gear and stuff like that as though that makes them prepared. It's not like it doesn't make them prepared, but it also makes them highly dependent, right? On things working. Okay. This isn't new. We see it in martial arts and self-defense training all the time, right? Students collect techniques, they collect kata, they collect variations, right? But they never learn when to use them, right? What context is this designed for? What attacker type is this designed for, right? They never learn why they work or how much is needed, right? Like mushadori, right? Mushadori, onikudaki, ogyaku. If you're familiar with these terms, right? These are gyakuwaza. They are shoulder dislocations. Okay. Everybody tends to learn them, soft training, dojo, whatever, right? But there's 3 levels of force and application to these things, minimum. Everything from using it to set up a follow-up, right? Because you might not need the whole thing or it might start falling apart or whatever, right? There is using it as a restraint and a control to bring somebody down, move them into a, like I've used mushadori and onikudaki to get somebody to flip over, right, into a better control position, right, or ogyaku, using it both to take somebody down and then as a way to restrain them flat on their chest, but the shoulder has to be manipulated a certain way. But ultimately, they're to dislocate the shoulder, like completely separate the head of the humerus from the AC joint, so it's just like barely connected by connective tissue, ligaments, tendons, those kind of things, right? But there's also what happens when it's falling apart, right? Can you shift from that one to another one, not randomly, but what does a collapsing onikudaki naturally turn into, right? Or an omotegyaku, right? Is frontal wrist reversal, right? If it fails, right? And how many different directions can it fail in? What does that turn into, right? So we don't just struggle to keep something that's not working, right? But the point is that they never bother to learn these other things, right? Because they just collect the forms, and variations are still forms. Okay. So what ends up happening is under pressure, right? They hesitate, they choose wrong, right? They default to habit. They struggle to keep something that's not working. You know, they internally, mentally, emotionally, they start breaking, right? So the problem is not lack of options for these folks, right? It's lack of prioritization. Okay. Um, at one point early on, right after I'd already earned my black belt, right, a group of us actually made a decision. A couple of people together, right, but a bunch of us, right. Um, we didn't stop training, but we did more of this other stuff than we did, redundancy training, right? Go to the dojo. I mean, how many ways can you do ichimonji and throw a shuto and whatever, right? But for all intents and purposes, we stopped training for about a year. Okay. I don't mean we stop. Okay. We stopped doing the fun habitual training in the dojo, the mutual admiration society stuff. Okay. Um, Not because we lost interest, but because we wanted to test what we thought we knew. And that doesn't mean that we went around and challenged people to fights and all that kind of stuff, right? It wasn't that kind of like, let's go to a street, in a back alley and see what happens. It wasn't like that, right? It was actually structured. Okay. So, but the point is that we wanted to see, like, we wanted to answer the question, does this actually work outside of the training environment? Does it actually work outside of the dojo or our belief system or whatever? Okay. Not blind faith. Well, you just have to trust your teachers. I do. But I was also taught that I have to have a healthy sense of doubt so that I can question things that don't quite match up with my experience of reality and things like that, right? Not question things just because I'm being a dick, right? It's not that kind of thing. It's not just an ongoing series of random what ifs, right? It's not that kind of thing, right? But either way, right? So we did this thing, right? And so we trained with people in other systems. We trained with other practitioners or guys that were just like good at fighting, right? Different approaches, that kind of stuff, right? And so, to be honest, the overall goal was to see if we could break the system. We could figure out under what conditions Ninjutsu didn't work. I mean, like, who does that, right? Um, we did, right? Because didn't want to be I didn't want to be, we didn't want to be, uh, you know, in the wrong situation outside the dojo to find out that this shit didn't work. Okay. And we found, we did find moments where things broke. Okay. But what we found was interesting. It wasn't that things broke, it was why they broke. And what we found was that it wasn't that the art failed, right? It was that we failed to apply it correctly in those different situations against those different practitioners, those different styles, whatever, right? When we were trying to stick to this as a style, completely disregarding his, and then we didn't match up our kamae to what he was doing. I don't mean we matched it like this is the closest one to his. No, 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 no. Matching the kamae to prevent his ability to do what he does easily and well. That kind of stuff, right? Um, so, uh, like I said, we learned we learned where we were mistranslating things or where there were holes in our own understanding. Okay. Especially what we were looking for was when things broke down. Because when things broke down, it wasn't because techniques didn't work. It wasn't because the system was wrong, right? It was because we were applying the right things at the wrong time. We were applying things in the wrong way. We're trying to force things to work in the wrong conditions, right? Anything can work in the dojo. Shit. right? That's why we use the term in the dojo, the Mutual Admiration Society, okay? Because, the way we do it here is great. Meanwhile, right, out in the real world, okay? So, again, we were focused on what we knew, not wrong, right? But we got to be careful, right? Is this a belief system or is this training for the real world, right? We're focused on what we knew instead of what the situation required. Okay. So again, the art didn't break. Our application of it did. Okay. And that's the same mistake that people are making, not just in martial arts, right? But in survival, but not just in that kind of survival, right? In life. Okay. The problem is that people are focused on what to do without ever learning how to decide on best options or at least sufficient options. Okay. And there are 3 steps that must happen before anything else. That's why I didn't talk about these 3 when I laid out the 9 steps. I talked about 4 through 9. Okay. Because for the longest time, I taught these things as a part of right? And I really focused on this other step. It's step 8, right? Because I think that just that we ask these there are these names to the steps, but there's also more of a right brain conceptual question that helps with grounding and stabilizing a system that, because in a survival situation, you're not going to be normal. I don't care how much you like to camp. I don't care how much, how good your skills are and whatnot. Watch any of these freaking alone survival things where people go out and they're just all bragging about how they do all this stuff and they're just good at these things, except that they can't take a break and go in the house and warm up and have a meal and then go back out. And you're going to be out there for weeks or months or whatever. Right. And so what they fail to train for are the actual conditions, mentally, emotionally, those kind of things. Field first aid, shit like that they're actually going to have to, or may run into, right? Their gear breaks, shit like that, right? First time somebody they're allowed to have like 3 items or something like that. First time their axe breaks or their bow and arrow, they're running out of arrows or they lose these things or whatever. They start shit in a breadbasket, right? What am I going to do now? Well, then right? Okay. So as long as you have shit, you're okay. But as soon as you don't, okay. So anyway, like I said, there are 3 steps that must happen before anything else. And most people skip all 3. Okay. I have, again, for years, I just focused on the wilderness survival stuff. Not just the skills. I hammered these 3 things home. But again, the more time I spend with this stuff, the more I'm teaching, the more I'm revisiting things and looking at things. Eventually down the line, it just looking at these things and I'm like, holy shit, right? This framework isn't just urban, or it's just not just wilderness survival. What it looks like is going to change, but this is also urban survival. But even before we talk about how to convert this stuff for life things, like these first 3 are non-negotiable, right? It doesn't matter if we're talking about survival, self-defense, we're talking, somebody dropped a divorce bomb on you, or, suddenly a freaking tax bill came out of nowhere, or your house is on fire. Shit happens all the time. Okay. These are the 3 that most people miss, or they see it in training and they skip right over it. Just like, the 8 phases. We give these things to students all the time. Most students skip right over general awareness, situational awareness, escaping to safety, and the 2 de-escalation things, because all they're concerned about is, the fighting things because, I don't want to get hurt. I get it. But we gave you how many different phases to prevent from getting to that point to begin with? But we're going to select putting 99.8% of our attention on the place that, one, most sane people don't want to go to, and two, it's the point where the most things there's the most likelihood of something going wrong. Okay, so then really not. Again, people are going to do what they're going to do, right? I'm just here to be the messenger they don't want to listen to. All right. So anyway, again, these are the same. These 3 steps are the same, regardless of whether we're talking about literal wilderness or urban survival during like a shit it's the fan moment. A lot of people know the SHTF kind of thing, right? Whether it's that or it's a street or home defense attack or any other sudden and shocking life problem. It is what it is, right? When that explosion happened in the dojo itself didn't catch fire, but it was the smoke and water damage and whatnot. But when that happened, James, what did we spend hours doing? We were on site, couldn't do anything other than what were we doing?
Waiting and watching.
And assessing and what do we have and when can we move and those kind of things, right? So the first 3 steps, right? This is really kind of like the control phase, right? Because there's a control phase, there's a maintaining a function phase, and then there's a duration phase to make sure that there's a orientation control phase, there's a set things up so you don't die phase, right? That the elements don't kill you for wilderness survival. And then there's a phase to keep you from getting in your own way. Okay. And again, anybody that's been through the wilderness survival version of the Zanzon Ho, you know what I'm talking about, right? Either way, the first 3 steps. Step 1 is in wilderness survival, we say it's initial safe surroundings. Okay. But what we're really getting to is answering the question, what happened? Right? Not what you think happened, not what you feel happened, right? What actually happened. Right? And sometimes the first move isn't going into action. Sometimes the first move is to restrain oneself from just doing something to do nothing long enough to see clearly. Now, when I say do nothing, what I'm talking about is random action. Because when I stop to assess, to really understand the problem, I'm not doing nothing. Just because people don't see movement, right? Sometimes what I'm doing is allowing the adrenal response to calm down a bit so I can get some of the left brain function back. Okay? Sometimes it's more possible than others, but this is also why, we train a certain way, right? But either way, right? So again, sometimes the first move is it's the action of no action, right? It's doing nothing, right? Long enough to see clearly. And we don't need to see everything, right? Because step 2 is making a decision. It's answering the question, what's next? Not everything, not the entire problem, not how do I solve this, right? It's what must be handled right now, which is why this bleeds off of the first part, because what might need to be done right now is I need to calm my ass down. I need to take some time, figure it out. Okay. But what needs to be done right now? Okay. That's why when 9/11 happened, called the school where my daughter was. Okay. I need to ascertain her status. I need to ascertain her safety or level of safety or whatever. So I know what to do next. And I know what to do next after that. that kind of thing, right? I'm not sitting in a corner vibrating and pissing myself. I'm not making up stories about how bad it could be because I don't know anything. That's right. I don't know anything. So next step is start the process of getting information. Okay. So again, what must be handled right now? You don't solve the problem. You don't solve the big problem, the whole problem. You solve the next problem, right? When the fire happened at the dojo, right? We're watching the flames. We're watching shit. Oh, it's just like the thickness of smoke and all that kind of stuff, right? But just I'm seeing the whole thing, right? And I'm just getting a general sense of like, what is this? Right? And not just fire, because I'm looking at the density of the smoke. I'm looking at where they're dumping water, looking at all this stuff, right? And in my head, right? Okay, there's prioritization. What can we do without? Got decades of books and notes and stuff in this one corner, that kind of thing, right? And so the current problem is get uh, a better sense of the scope, right? But what then? Okay, so what has to be handled right now? Okay, which was assessing not the problem to the building, not the problem that there's a fire. What's right to assess the damage inside. So as soon as we could get inside, right, then things got moved. It's things that need to be protected got moved into certain areas. Tarps got thrown over those because they were going to be like hammering even more stuff, right? And so we need to get those things covered up. We needed to then, okay, so we got this stuff kind of handled. All right, what's the next problem? Next problem is looting, right? Because people are certain types of people are attracted to places like that, and they're going to go through it. We had people freaking wandering through as soon as the doors were open because they just wanted to see. No, you didn't. Okay, not inside of a fire-ridden place. You were looking to see what you could pick up and take out, right? So then we needed to make sure that the doors could be secured because the fire department had broken all the locks. So how do we do that? Right? We're not leaving the scene until this is taken care of. And then what's next with, right? But again, as we're doing these things, the process itself, it doesn't just answer that question. It actually produces more clarity. It allows more clarity to come back. Okay. So we've got what happened. Answer that question, right? For clarity, not what I think, not what I feel, not what's fair, none of that shit. Okay. Objectively, as much as possible. Okay. Like if I'm being shoved, okay, what happened? Okay. Well, what happened is I'm stumbling, right? So what's next? What's next is I need to catch my balance. Because if I'm focusing on who the fuck shoved me, I'm going to fall down. And then they're going to be on me and doing whatever they want to do. Right? That's what I mean. Where does your head go? Okay. The prioritization is, right? I may not know what the whole complexity of the situation is, but I do know that I'm stumbling backwards and I need to act, right? What's next? What's now? What's now is neutralize the stumble. So if it can be neutralized by dropping the knees and sinking the hips and getting the hips back under the shoulders, not pulling the shoulders up over the hips, then that should do it. If not, then I sudemi. I sacrifice position, go to the ground, right? To now I don't have to worry about being off balance anymore, right? Roll over, recover, that kind of thing. That's why we practice skills, including the skills that people don't fucking like. The universe doesn't give a shit if we like things or not, right? James, do we have that t-shirt? Do we have a t-shirt that on the online pro shop that says nobody ever said you had to like it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And if not, we should, because that's like truer than anything, right? Nobody ever said you had to like it. And when you need it, that's not the place where you go, shit, I should have practiced rolling more, right? Whatever. Okay. So again, here I don't solve the problem. I solve the next problem, right? And then step 3, right, is usable aids on hand, right? That answers the question, what's here? Okay. we take inventory, we take stock of what we already have, right? What do you already have available, right? Resources, tools, options, people. Most people miss this because they're so focused on what they don't have or what they wish they had that they're missing what they already have, right? Here's another real world story, right? When my father passed, okay? No life insurance. My brother and sister and I, our relative, respective families, right? We had to come up with the money quickly, okay? Over $2,000 a piece, okay? It's coming up on Christmas, all that kind of stuff, right? Um, those two, between the two of them, right? Um, there was panic, there was frustration, there was anger, right? How could they not have insurance? Da, da, da. This is going to come out of my money. I've got to do who's going to, whatever, right? They were focusing on what wasn't available, right? One was focusing on, well, I've got the money, but like I'm not going to be able to buy anybody else Christmas presents because that's the fund that's going. Somebody else, I'm putting this on a credit card, and now I got to pay it back, and who's paying me back? All that kind of stuff, right? I did something different. I paused. I identified the immediate need, right? I just want what's my share of the responsibility, right? Because the funeral director, look, I mean, business, I understand. He's been stung by a whole bunch of people already, right? Didn't get paid and stuff. So his policy was, look, there's not insurance. It's writing this check. I want the money. It's this much by the day before the funeral, or there's not going to be a funeral. Okay? We can't do that. Yeah, you can. Okay. It's a service just like everybody else. Okay. So what I didn't do was fall into all the other stuff. Now, was there system shock? What do you mean there's no insurance? Right? Was there? Yeah, but here's the clarity, right? None of that other shit was going to matter at the moment. What I needed was I needed to know how much and by when. Because I didn't have it. We just went through one of our own little calamities. Right? So first thing I did was take inventory. What's here? Okay. What do you mean what's here? Right? You said you didn't have the money. Yeah. Okay. But you have all the money and still had to pay home bills, dojo bills, all that kind of stuff. Right? Yeah. So what that question led to, what's here? Right? What do I already have? Okay. So that led to accounting for what I did have that was extra. If I would have needed to, I could have started to think about, like, can I sell some things that I can unload pretty quickly? I don't really need them, or they're replaceable later. I need to generate cash, right? But what I did was I inventoried what I had money wise. I created some offers for students that were really attractive, right? One of which was to discount things heavily, like 50% discount on this thing, right? Explain what it was for. Here's the deal. If this is something that you can use or whatever, this is a win-win for both of us, right? And in the process, one of the offers that was built was a coaching program, right? Right? Building that thing turned into a long-term program that was available long after that moment, right? But my point here is that the problem didn't change. The need for that much money in 4 days, 5 days, okay? It didn't change. My approach changed, right? And this points to a huge issue, right? Energy misdirection. Because most people don't just struggle with solutions, with not knowing what to do. A lot of people waste energy on blame, frustration, anger, regret, all kinds of shit. Energy spent in the wrong direction is still energy lost. Okay. While somebody's having a freaking meltdown, they're not engaged in solving the problem. Huh? So, from a directed effort perspective, right? Again, this is where I know you guys are all enlightened, so it's not you. I get it, right? But maybe this will help you help other people, right? Because this is where people get it wrong, right? They think effort is the answer, right? As long as they're doing something, right? You know, Yoda, do or not do, there is no try. Okay, right? But effort is not the answer. Direction of energy matters as much as amount. It's not just effort, it's effort applied with awareness. Okay? With awareness. All right. James, I'm going to take a little break here before I jump into this a little bit more. Questions, comments before we end up like wrapping this up?
Chris Cowan checked in a little bit ago, said good evening.
Oh, cool.
And Dave just said what always surprises me is how many of the contestants on Alone quit because they missed their loved ones. Can definitely tell they never spent time in the military.
Yeah, indeed. Right. That and when they do their backstories, right, they're all very, very confident about this and whatever. But often you can see who's going to end up in that position within a couple of days because they're already lamenting leaving beforehand. And this has nothing to do with like not loving the person because lots of them have huge whys, right? If I can do this, it'll set my family. We can like move someplace more stable, all these kind of things. But apparently that why is not big enough, right? There's a lot of things that fall into like the Seishin Teki Kyoyo, right? The for lack of another a more expedient word at the moment, right? That concept of know thyself, right? Because most people do not know the difference between being alone and being lonely. And most people don't realize or hide the fact from others. It's even worse if you hide it from yourself, right? That the reason they're in relationships, friendships, whatever, is because they're terrified of being alone, not because of any kind of value that they can bring to those things, right? They're more terrified of being alone, right? And being lonely than having somebody that's an absolute tyrant of a partner. And I know that's like a punch in the gut, but it doesn't make it not true. And there's a huge difference between being alone and being lonely. Right? Perfectly fine with being alone. Right? Lonely, that speaks of a need to have something to be distracted to whatever, right? Lonely means I'm not okay with being with me. Right? Being alone is a condition. Being lonely is an emotional state. Not the same. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, just I don't want to keep diving deep into more deeply into this, but anyway, so again, if this makes sense, if you're seeing how this applies, right, beyond just survival, right? Drop a comment, share this with somebody, right? Okay. Anyway, because this kind of thinking changes everything. Okay. Most people they sign up for the techniques because it's the fantasy of being the kick-ass super savior and all that kind of stuff. And I get it, right? And it's not like the techniques aren't important. But if our internal state is easily destabilized, if we can't make good decisions when things are chaotic, Anybody can fucking do things. I had military leaders that pointed this stuff out on a regular basis, right? They would pray for like shitty weather when we were going out for field stuff and whatnot, right? Because if you can do it under those conditions, you can do it under any conditions, right? But people want everything to be like, rainbows and unicorn farts. But if everybody could do it, if that was this thing, then Ninjutsu would have no place in the world, right? We wouldn't be talking about perseverance if there was nothing to persevere. And what most people think are problems is not what Ninjutsu is talking about when it comes to problems. Okay. So this establishes this baseline, right? And allows us to gain more and more clarity to be able to make better decisions, right? To create buffers, those kind of things, right? And so this control then leads to this continuity transition, so to speak, right? Like, okay, I've established this. Now, how do I maintain this? How do I keep this going long enough to make a difference, right? So this becomes the next place where people fail, right? Because a lot of people think that once they figured things out, well, they're done. Like, I know what's wrong. Well, great. Telling me what's wrong or showing me that you know what's wrong, just like when somebody, and I'm guilty of this too when I was a student coming up through the ranks. Telling my teacher that I know what the problem is doesn't fix the problem. You're now wasting oxygen and mental things. Doing what? Like telling the teacher that you know, but knowing what the problem is not the same as knowing how to solve the problem before it becomes a bigger problem. Because if we're talking, the problem caused the technique to fail or the teacher to step in to correct things. There was no adjustment along the way. There was no I can sense where things are going, so I'm going to shift in that direction, right? So I remember one time telling a teacher, they stepped in and reminded me of this mistake that I was making, and I looked around because I wanted them to know that I knew, right? And I looked around, just whipped around really quickly, and I went, I know, right? And he patted me on the shoulder and he said, "Oh, okay." That was a Friday evening, the beginning of a 3-day seminar. He gave me no other corrections, nothing else. It wasn't like he didn't talk to me. He did. We talked at breaks, all that kind of stuff, but he didn't give me any corrections for the rest of that seminar. Well, that's a dick move. Like, why would he do that? This is in the teachings too, right? Not only when the student is ready, the teacher appears, but the quickest way to make a teacher go away is to use those two magic words. I know. Okay. Fantastic. Work it out. Okay. If you know, then you don't need a teacher telling you. Have at it. Okay. And that's where things tend to stop, right? They think once they figured it out, they're done, but they're not. Okay. Control gets you through the moment, the shock and awe moment. Continuity, the ability to keep going. Terrence, Victor, okay, your questions. That gets you through the situation. Okay. Because you can solve for what happened. You can make a decision about what's next. But what happens if that fails? What happens if you were wrong, right? Can you make another decision? Can you shift? Can you maintain a state of stasis equilibrium when you're wrong, when you make a mistake, when you find out other information that invalidates other things, or can you just fucking adjust? Right? Because steps 4 to 9, this is the high level stuff, right? This is keeping us going and adjusting as we go, right? So once you have control, you have to keep it. This is no different in life or wilderness survival or a self-defense situation against somebody who's trying to beat, break, or kill you. Once you have control, you have to keep it. What do I say in class? For those of you who are my students or you've been to seminars, what do I say? Right? You never give something back to the attacker that you've taken from them. Because you can get control. Okay. Our founding fathers in this country. I know some of you guys are listeners are not from this country, but one of our founding fathers said, "We have given you this Constitution. We've given you this country, right? This representative republic. Now, it's your job to keep it." Right? People have no fucking idea what it's based on, so they have no idea how it gets maintained. And how do you maintain that in the mix of a shit ton of people throwing around their personal ideas about how things should be? And then they use the terminology because it would be fair to everyone, when the reality is their fucking ego only cares that things work a certain way so that their life is easy. And that's not pessimistic. That's realistic. Because nobody solves for the human factor. As long as it's ideal, as long as it sounds good, except it's not. Right? This goes back to kata. Kata are a device for teaching you how to make sense out of chaos. And if you can't do that, then you will be eaten by the chaos. You will be derailed by the chaos. Okay. So again, once you have control, now you have to keep it. You must maintain it, right? That means preventing further damage, maintaining essentials, right? I had to make more money while maintaining the amount that I needed to make sure bills were paid and things like that during the whole dad fiasco thing, right? It means stabilizing function. It means managing energy, right? Making sure that I didn't wear myself so freaking far down or discount stuff so much to where it would have taken me weeks or months to recover, which means next month's bills wouldn't have gotten paid or whatever, right? It means maintaining health. It means keeping direction, focus on where I need to go so it's not just fucking haphazard, right? This is where survival actually happens, right? But we can't make good decisions if we didn't establish control. And it's not control. The first three steps are not about controlling the situation itself. That's what people jump to. They got to get their freaking hands around it and wring its neck to make it go away, right? But that's not what steps 1 through 3 are about. Steps 1 through 3 are about getting control of me. Me. What's my state? Mentally, do I understand what happened? Okay. Do I understand things clearly enough to know what to do next? What's the most important thing to do now? Right. And then take stock of what I already have, energy wise, finance, whatever it is that matches the situation. What do I already have? Because I'm not just inventory shit like, oh, I've got some turmeric and ginger, gummies here and stuff, to keep my metabolism going or my joint stuff going well and all. What the hell does that have to do with like paying for your dad's fucking funeral? It's not just random stuff. This is what training is about. Training is the past masters passed down more than just step by step how to do fucking techniques. Excuse my language. I'm getting heated now. They passed down something even more important. And that was how to think about bad situations, how to think while going through bad situations, how to think in a way that we can make sense out of chaos. I understand the physical stuff is easy. It's easiest to gauge. It's easiest to monitor. It's easiest to know whether you're doing it right or not. But life is our litmus test, right? Whether or not we're doing things right or not. Are you moving forward? Are you still upright and breathing? That kind of thing, right? Cool. So again, this is where survival actually happens. Okay. And this is like, Most people train for strength, for speed, for power, for dominance, for I don't know, a chill life and comfort, right? I get it. Okay. Those are advantages. They're absolutely advantages. Right? Strength and speed don't make things work. They make what is already working work better. The problem is that when they're gone, anything and everything that depended on strength and speed collapses. Money makes things easier. But you know what? People that win the fucking lottery or get an inheritance or whatever that have shitty financial skills, no budgeting skills, nothing, are broke. Statistically speaking, they're broke within a year. Because if they didn't have fucking good restraint and everybody wants to win the lottery. Oh, when I win the lottery, I will. You'll be broke. You'll just buy bigger shit. And you'll do it more often. If you can't budget $20, you're not going to budget 20 million. Might take you a little longer to run out of it. Okay. People rush out. You ever see those TV shows and whatnot, right? And people win the lottery and stuff. And then this realtor helps them buy a house and all that. Not once are they factoring for taxes, ongoing for a bunch of years, right? All this kind of shit, upkeep, whatever, right? My wife and I like to look up where people are afterwards and stuff. Yeah. Made for a good TV show, though. Yeah. Just like when people get they use the income tax system, right, as a savings plan. So because they're counting on getting a refund. You don't get a refund, you get a rebate. Right? Some people get a lot more money back than they ever put in. It's not my system. Whatever, right? But what I have noticed is that it comes in, for most of them, they don't pay down their bills. They go out and buy more shit. And then a couple of months later, when they're out of money, I know, because I've had students come and do this to me. Hey, do you want to buy this thing? Do you want to buy this thing? Do you want to buy? Because I need to make some money. Except that they're selling it for like 10% of what the fuck they paid for it. So like the tax system to get a rebate back is not and this is not these are not, I learned this from Jack Oben, right? He's a senior in our system. Okay. I know what Jack does these days. Okay. But Jack, when I was training, was a financial planner. Okay. Highly recommend reading the book Ninpo, Living and Thinking as a Warrior by Jack Oben. There's a whole section in there on financial stuff, and there's just a couple of nuggets that will get people thinking. Or not. If nothing else, it has a cool cover. What the fuck? Anyway, so, all right. So again, money makes things easier. You can buy shit, all that kind of stuff, but when money runs out, everything collapses. Okay? Happens to people who put all their shit into Wall Street all the time. Okay? So the long-term doctrine, so to speak, right, is we were taught early, right? Very early. Strength fades. Speed slows. It's a natural part of the aging process. But timing, positioning, decision-making, timing improves, gets better as you get older. Positioning sharpens because you get better at it. Decision-making deepens. Okay? So here's the thing. The goal is not to stay at your physical peak. The goal is to develop something that outlasts the eventual decline. That's Ninpo. Okay? This is the same idea across everything. Survival, self-protection, martial arts, life, okay? Relationships, everything. Conditions change. The principle or the principles do not. Right? So again, I'm going to wind this thing down. If this way of thinking resonates with you, if you want to see the full system laid out, right, I will be rolling out this student training guide and additional. They're actually from classes, right? Actual lessons. We're talking, what are they, hour and a half, something like that. We already have the one recorded for translating the Zanzon Ho no Tejun, the initial stages for effective wilderness survival laid out. Right, I'll be doing the one for urban survival for there. So that'll be set. So keep an eye out for the rest of the week. Right, but again, it walks you through the full framework step by step. Right, not as a list of skills. Right, but as a way to think under pressure. Okay. All right. So just to kind of wrap this up, and then I'll take any last minute questions or comments. Most people don't fail because they lack solutions. Right? Most people that have spent years in martial arts, self-defense, or whatever, don't get their asses handed to them because they don't know any techniques or because they don't have enough. Okay. They fail because they never established control before acting. The problem doesn't care how you feel about it. Right? It responds to what you do next. Right? And as my military leaders said, and I'll repeat it again, anybody can perform when conditions are in their favor. Okay? The question is, what happens when they're not? Okay? What happens when they're not? So that's what I have for this one. James, questions, comments, complaints? You know me, I got broad shoulders.
Just one from Victor says, much of what you explained about the focus of energy applies to the sword, or at least that's what I see in my head is the relevance.
The principles are universal. If they don't cross lines, then there's something wrong with it. Right? Just like Seigan is Seigan is Seigan. Doesn't matter if we're doing it unarmed, doing it with a staff, spear, sword, hanbo. That throws people off too. There is no Seigan no Kamae with a hanbo. I know those 4 Kamae. Really? Awesome. Except that in the Kukishin-ryu, where our bow stuff primarily comes from, hanbo was basically on the equivalent of a what if scroll. Same thing with the Jo, right? That's what happens when your long staff or your long weapon, spear, halberd, long staff or whatever, gets cut down to size, so to speak, right? So yes, hanbo, 4 Kamae, on top of all the bow Kamae. But what do I know? Just some fat old bald guy with a podcast. Might have been around for a couple of weeks. Anyway, anything else? That's it? Seriously?
That was it.
All right. So last 2 announcements. First one is there are still 4 spots available for the Japan immersion trip. Trin's on it, Alan's on it, Kyle's on it, Victor's on it. There's still 4 spots. I'm taking 4 people with me at the moment, but there's still 4 spots. You can go to onlineninjaacademy.com/Japan-trip. Get all the details. Deadline for registration is April 10th, because after that, I do something that I don't know anybody else who does it. We do 4 weekly prep classes so that people are not, in the words of master teachers and current Soke, embarrassments to the Bujinkan when they get in country. But we're also not just going to Hombu for training. We're also going to significant historical sites that lie at the foundation of what we do, right? Including a place where Daisuke Nishina, also known as Daisuke Togakure, the acknowledged founder of the Togakure school, even though it was his grandson that organized everything and then backdated stuff to dad being the second and grandpa being the first, right? Soke, he claimed 3rd position. Good luck finding people doing that today, right? Where Daisuke Nishina trained when he was a student just like us. The dojo is no longer there, but the site absolutely is. Right. So it'll be fun. Okay. Anyway, there's that, and then let's see. We're the trip itself is May 11th through May 25th. There is a 1-week option for anybody that cannot do the full 2 weeks. That's fine, but the turnaround day has to be the day that I have designated, because I'm not going back and forth to Narita Airport If people cannot arrive or leave on that given day, then I will give you instructions. It's simple. You'll be able to get there, no problem. Okay, but I'm not hand holding more than once. Okay, and then when we get back, June 12th to the 14th, so it's a late Friday evening through Sunday. We're doing our spring camp, and the theme will be Japan recap. So I won't have any things to fill in until we're there, and I can update as things go and I think about topics and whatnot. But if you can't make it to Japan, but you want a weekend compressed of 2 weeks of training, that's what we'll be doing June 12th to the 14th. And I know it's in June, and I said spring, but on the calendar, June or summer doesn't start until the 20th. So I'm literally sliding our spring camp in right under the wire as it goes. All right. So that's it. Any last minute questions or comments before we wrap this up?
No, sir.
All right. James, as always, thank you. I appreciate it. Everybody else, hopefully I'll see you for Whiteboard Wednesday and Friday Masterclass. And if not, then I'm not going to see you in class. Otherwise, I'll see you next week for KUDEN.